Welcome, one and all, to the podcast dedicated to exploring the vast media landscape in search of its finest creatives. I'm Darren, your host. Welcome to Heroes of the Mediascape. My featured guest today is author, podcaster, entertainment journalist, and film critic, Byron Lafayette. How's it going, man?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It is so awesome to be podcasting with you again, I must
Oh,
admit.
it really is. I have to say, some of my favorite, if not favorite, podcasts are always the ones that I've done with you. And so when you mentioned about me coming onto the show, it was just immediately a hard yes. I was like, oh, absolutely. Anytime you invite me on, I'll be there.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
No, yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
Our podcasting history has been, a lot of my favorites too.
Mhm.
They've been always such a blast to do, and we've had such a fun time. We've talked about some very different topics and different like movies and stuff for each episode that we've done. You know,
We absolutely have, yeah. Both on your show and on mine, it's been very eclectic, and I want to say we've talked about like Wall Street 2 with Oliver Stone, Pirates of the Caribbean 2. We've had some interesting conversations that have been fascinating. You introduced me to some great new films. It's always been a lot of fun. I want to say I think probably my favorite out of all of the shows we did was probably and a lot of people will probably groan when I say it, knowing my history with Pirates of the Caribbean, but Pirates of the Caribbean 2 was probably my favorite show.
that's awesome. That might have been the
Mhm.
first one, right?
I think it might have been, yeah. Because we've done 4, right?
Yes. Yeah, 2 on mine, 2 on yours. This is number 5.
Ah, there we go. Oh, yeah, because it was let's see, I'm trying. Yeah, because we did Wall Street on yours, and we did Pirates 2 on yours,
Yep.
and then on mine we did it was I remember the title, the Christopher Reeve movie You've Never Seen was
Yes.
our second one, which I'm still planning on a sequel at some point to that podcast. So
That would be so much fun.
hmm
By the way, that movie is called Somewhere in Time.
there we go. That was I was always so grateful that you introduced me to that one, because it was one that I'd never really heard of, and just was it was heart-wrenching and just an amazing watch. It's gonna be one that I revisit soon.
Well, it's just funny because, like, given like our history and our nature, like obviously we're both big DC guys and big Superman, Batman guys, and so the fact that Christopher Reeve is in this movie, and obviously I'm such a big fan of him as Superman, that when I make a comment, an outrageous comment, like, yeah, Somewhere in Time might be my favorite Christopher Reeve movie ever, and people are like, what? Like that? What are you talking about? No, but seriously, it's such an underrated movie, and it's just one of those movies that just really spoke to me from the first time I've seen it. So
Oh, absolutely. It has so many layers to it, so much to unpack. It's one of those ones where, you're always going to find something new when you rewatch it. And I mean, just as evidence that you see the fan base, that travel out to the hotel. Is it every year, I believe, that they have
yeah,
the festival,
every fall, yep, yep.
hmm It's like it's just great. I've always thought like how much fun it would be to go to that event, just because with all the outfits and the costumes and seeing the building and everything would just be like really really fun.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I would love to go there too. I haven't been there,
Mhm.
so yeah, and obviously like the website, and then like the newspaper that they do every quarter for Insight,
Mhm.
International Network for Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm plugging that way too much. Actually, to be honest, not enough. But
Mm,
um, anyways, yes,
yeah.
Somewhere in Time, amazing movie. We had a lot of fun podcasting about it. I can't wait till we podcast more about it. Would love to hear more about that soon.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was contacted by I believe it was last year, I think, by this woman who had a lot to, was very active in the fandom, and I believe with the magazine and a bunch of other stuff. And she listened to our podcast and loved it and thought it was amazing and everything. And so I always thought it'd be fun to potentially have her, on the show with both of us, and kind of share in the fandom and kind of hear some of the. She has a lot of behind the scenes stories, from a lot of the cast and crew that she's talked to and everything. And so I was like, oh, it'd be very interesting, I think.
Absolutely, I'd love to meet her too.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
then you also had me on your podcast before that. You were actually gracious enough, and maybe this is the first time we had ever podcasted. Actually,
Mhm.
now that I think about it, you were nice enough to have me on your podcast to promote my book covering the Snyderverse saga,
Mhm.
cover all
Yes,
the
I
Zack Snyder DC movies.
yes, you know what? I think you're right. That was the first time that we ever podcasted. And yeah, like I remember I'm trying to remember, like I think I might have seen you post about it, I think in maybe like one of the Snyder groups. And and I was like, "Oh, this looks really interesting." And I was like, "Oh, I gotta have him on the show." And um excellent book for anyone who is listening. So you should definitely pick it up. It is the definitive history, of the Snyderverse. So if you're at all interested in behind the scenes elements for filmmaking, and especially DC, it's definitely the one to read. I really enjoyed it. It was page turner for me. So.
Well, thank you.
Hmm.
I'm honored. Yes, and that book came out 4 years ago now, and is now in some ways is becoming relevant again. The topic, not the book, the topic has become relevant again, for different reasons. But hey, maybe we'll touch on that here in a second.
Hmm.
But first, since we've mentioned you had me on your podcast, specifically, you had me on your podcast called Under the Lens with Byron Lafayette. So I want to ask you about your podcast. So when it comes to and with your podcast, it's interview style. What inspired you to launch that kind of podcast?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it was kind of funny because, I'd been pretty much strictly like a print journalist. I did articles, film reviews, and was always for websites, and like I said, always the printed word. I guested on a few podcasts here and there, so I was never opposed to the format or anything. And then it was, just kinda like one day, I was kind of just sitting and I was thinking about it, and I'd been listening to a few podcasts, and I was like, I probably should have one of these," And it was like, and I kinda started thinking about like, "Well, what would I do?" Like, what would I talk about? Because I kind of, I'd written about so many movies. I was like, "I kinda don't wanna do like a full on like, like movie review podcast." I was like, "I kinda wanna do something a little bit different and kind of more in tune with what I enjoyed." And I kind of started leaning into interviews at that point because before that, for the probably about 4 years before my podcast, I'd kind of specialized in a lot of interviews. And uh, Down a bit of a rabbit trail, but it is all connected, I promise. That my first interview, like kind of how it started, was I was writing for this like tiny website called kaboom.com, and it was it was all comic books, movies, and actual like comic book reviews. And I was on their Slack channel, for their staff writers. And I saw this one like thread that was going on with a couple of the editors, and they were like, "Hey, does anyone want to interview, Rob Liefeld for I want to say I think it was Deadpool 2, I want to say I think." And I saw that and I was like, "Oh man, somebody's claimed this already," because it had been posted like 7 hours before. And then I looked and like nobody had claimed it. And in fact, like a lot of people were like, "I would never talk to Rob Liefeld. Like, I don't want to talk to him," and they were like criticizing him, whatever. And I was like, "Oh," and immediately I sent a message. I was like, "I'll do it." And and so I got in touch with his PR guy, and it ended up, we got along like gangbusters. And I probably interviewed him at least half a dozen times or so. And and one thing I will say, because he's been getting a lot of heat lately on Twitter for some of his views on the MCU, but I have always defended him of saying, like, he's a really nice guy, actually a very decent guy. Like, he has a persona, that you kind of see, as I think a lot of people do, that are in the industry. But all of the interviews I've always had, he was an incredibly kind and decent person. So I always tell people, give him a chance. He's not quite the a-hole that he kind of sometimes portrays himself as, on social media. But anyway, so I kind of got the bug of doing interviews, and I started doing them more with, like, with some different people in film, started doing it with comic book writers, authors, everything. And then when I was sitting and thinking about a podcast, I was like, oh, what if I did an interview style? I was like, that'd be kind of fun. I'd listen to a little bit of Joe Rogan, and I was like, I really always enjoyed just hearing people's views on the world and their work. And I started digging through some of my archives, and I was like, man, I have like a lot of like audio, interviews that I'd done over the years, and I had just transcribed them, for whatever their websites were. And so I started like publishing a few of those. And decided on the name Under the Lens with Byron Lafayette. And I was like, um, you know, I kind of sold it, and I still have continued it, to an extent, as kind of this raw and unfiltered. So I do, very little editing when it comes to them. So, when you hear the podcast, for the most part, I would say about 90% of what you hear is exactly how the conversation goes. I don't really edit out content very much, unless it's like something unrelated to the podcast, where, like, the internet cuts out or something like that. Like, anything like that for the flow, I will. But like, the actual conversation itself is normally completely, you know, the way it happened when I talk to them. And my goal when I talk to people is to try and get as much of, like, you know, their own personal view on what it is, and like who they actually are as a person. That's what I always try and do with it. And also, as much as possible, I try and go to that I want it to be fun too. I want people to enjoy themselves as they're listening to it. You know, um, because of that, I generally don't do a lot of like hard issues, when it comes to it. So, uh, I don't tackle a lot of controversies in the entertainment industry or anything like that. Like, generally, most of the stuff is about either the person's work, their life, their career, whatever they've been doing, is generally what I've done. Now, if they want to talk about something controversial, I don't shy away from it. But generally, I want people to have a good time, be able to kick up their feet, and have a cup of coffee and enjoy listening to the podcast.
Absolutely. No, that's so awesome. What would you say has been the biggest challenge that you've faced when producing your podcast, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, that's a very good question. You know, uh, Funny enough, I would say, probably the biggest challenge is really scheduling, honestly. And it sounds so boring, like, I wish I had a more exciting, answer. But honestly, like, it's kind of just getting that set amount of content, like, laid out, recorded, and put out. Can be a little difficult, just because, especially when you're dealing with people, in like Hollywood industry and everything, you can't necessarily go on a set schedule, because a lot of times you'll be talking to someone, they'll have to reschedule at the last minute, or something goes on, and your audio quality was bad, you have to re-record, whatever. So you really have to be very, as Hondo would say in the CBS SWAT show, you have to be liquid, um, and you have to be able to go with the flow with what's going on, not get too stressed about it. And so in the beginning, I was very kind of the mindset of like, man, I have to get an episode out every week, and like really kind of stressing on like getting that schedule. And then I kind of realized, I was like, hey, this is my show. I can do what I want, if I want to release an episode every month, I can do that. And at the end of the day, I wanted to focus on the quality, necessarily over the quantity. And so yeah, I would say the challenge was just really, figuring out exactly how many episodes I was going to do, who I was going to talk to, and just trying to, herd those cats in order to do it. And and overcoming it is basically just by being cool and casual, and and being willing to realize that your best laid plans are not always going to happen, and sometimes things are going to fall through. Sometimes you're not going to get that person that you really want, or they're going to cancel and not get back with you. It's just it's the nature of the game, and you just have to roll with it.
No, I totally feel you. And, you've had some amazing and very interesting guests on your show over the
Thank
years.
you.
What would you say is your most interesting or favorite interview that you've done?
Ooh, yeah. There's been honestly, there's been so many. But And this will actually be a bit of a foreshadowing, I guess I can say, to my podcast, that I actually have an episode that's going to be upcoming. It's probably not going to be coming out until 2026, probably first quarter or so. And I would say it's probably my favorite podcast, my favorite interview that I've done. It's an old one. It's probably about 6 years old, I think, and it was with a professor. His name was Jay Dill. And he's a psychology professor, so he's a research psychologist. And I was talking with him one day, and he let slip, that he was like, oh yeah, he's like, something something. It reminds me of that time that I pitched to Gene Roddenberry. And I was like, wait, what? I was like, what are you talking about? And it ended up that he actually, like, he's a massive Star Trek fan, and he had like written a bunch of outlines for scripts, for TV episodes back in the day. And he had actually, gotten to directly pitch to Gene Roddenberry, several episode ideas. And he was instrumental in actually helping the next generation get the rights to Sherlock Holmes, because they had actually not had the rights when they were writing a lot of their stuff, and they ran into a lot of problems. And so I won't give away too
Oh,
much
wow.
because it's part of the conversation. But uh, basically, he was one of the ones who was able to help them do that. And so it was a fascinating conversation. And, we touched on, some of his like ideas. He had a novel that was really a great idea that he had been thinking about, submitting. I can't remember who the publisher is that does Star Trek novels, but it was a very, very fun interview. And so I did a publication version that was truncated, down. But recently, when I was looking through my archives, I was like, man, I really need to get this on the podcast because it's so fun.
Yeah, I'm, very looking forward to that. So stay tuned.
Mhm.
Be well.
Yes, yeah. So I guess, to throw a bone, because I do feel bad like telling people my favorite podcast is one that hasn't been released yet. So I will give them one that has actually been released as well. Um,
And it
uh,
doesn't have to be me. You don't have to say me.
uh, it is difficult because honestly, it's such a catch-all to say, but like, how I say like everyone is my favorite in the sense, just because, you know, every interview did bring something a little bit different. But there was one that was extremely interesting. That it was an early one that I released. That it was called Chasing American Monsters. It was with a guy named Jason Offit. And he had written a book that was basically, he was like a paranormal investigator, and he's a journalist as well, professor at a university, and he wrote a book on cryptoids. And so it was all about, I want to say it was like the southern area of the United States that he wrote about, the Mothman, all this different stuff, and shadow people. And it was a really interesting podcast because it kind of strayed a little bit from my norm, of like entertainment. And so that was one that I would say, I don't know if I can say it was my favorite, but it was probably one of the most fun that I've released, and just kind of off the beaten track of what I normally do.
No, definitely for sure. No, and that's really cool. That's a good one too. Um, I do have to ask, What was it like interviewing Chris Daughtry?
Oh man, it was so much fun. Like it was one of those ones that it kind of came out of the blue, honestly. Like it was the same public relations manager who handled Rob Liefeld. He contacted me and he was like, this was right around when Batman v Superman was coming out. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to interview Chris Daughtry?" I was like, hell yeah. It's like I'd been a huge fan of his music for years. And so like I couldn't believe that it was like an opportunity. And honestly, he was the nicest guy. Like just like, very down to earth, very humble. And I think what kind of surprised me so much is like, when you see these guys, especially musicians, you kind of have this idea in your mind of, who they are, from their stage persona. And it was kind of so much fun seeing like the fan in him, I think, of like hearing what a big fan he was of Batman and like DC and Superman and just kind of hearing like how excited he was to be able to do a variant cover, for BVS and just kind of hearing him geek
Yeah.
out over that was like it was really fun. And like I said, a really, really nice guy. I really love to interview him again, for his music career someday. I was thinking about reaching out to the PR guy to see, if I could put that together. But yeah, honestly, a really good artist too. Something I never really knew about him. If you guys haven't seen his variant pieces, like you can Google them. He did about 3 or 4 of them for BBS, and they were great. I think my favorite one was the black and white just pencil sketch. Was great. So yeah, very, very, very fun interview and a great guy.
Yeah, that's so cool. I remember when you did release that one, I was like, I have to listen to this immediately right away. Like I'm gonna stop what I'm doing.
Uh,
That's so awesome because Chris Daughtry is one of my favorite musicians.
mhm.
Uh, and
Oh.
obviously with him being such a big Batman fan,
Mhm.
like I remember him and another artist that I've been a big fan of for a long time, Colton Dixon. We're
Mm,
both are just
mhm,
huge Batman nerds, big Batman fans.
mhm.
Who you wouldn't really expect to be big Batman fans, so it's like really, really awesome.
Mhm.
But Chris
It's
Daughtry, he
true.
also did the performance for the DC fandom the first year they did that
Yes, you're right.
during
I'd
COVID,
forgotten about that. Yes, uh-huh. No, I'm trying to
which
remember.
was very.
I hope he performed "Waiting for Superman." I can't remember if he
I
performed
don't
that one
think
or
he
not.
did. I think it was a different one actually. Now you
Uh-huh.
say that, which that would have been the perfect. Yeah, I think it was
Uh-huh.
like a new song he had just come out with, which
Oh.
is kind
Mhm.
of oddly relevant to like what was happening in the world at the time
Mm,
during COVID.
mhm.
Um, and just the knowing how things operate and how that DC fandom operated,
Mhm,
uh, it wasn't live. I'll just
mhm,
say that. I'm
mm,
pretty
mhm.
certain it was not performed live, but nevertheless, he's
Mhm.
amazing. So
Oh, he is great. Yeah, and I remember I was sad that, we didn't have more time, because he was doing a signing for his variant covers. And so I remember like his rep was like, "Okay, yeah, you got like 10 minutes with him," and I was like, "Okay, I got to make these 10 minutes count." It's like, get as much as I can, but yeah, it was definitely that was one of the I would say one of the highlights of my career, honestly, was talking with him.
yeah, and there was actually another two-part episode that you did with Kevin D. Randall talking about UFOs and the deep state. And
Yes,
I
uh-huh.
just thought that was such a fascinating conversation.
Mhm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, like honestly, that was another one I so much enjoyed because um I'm very into like I love reading about like UFOs and everything. And I always joke with people that like I'm not all that into like the actual like alien part of it. I'm like into like the cover up element. That it's like it's so interesting reading about like all the military aspects, the government. Like I find that so interesting. And I'd heard of like Kevin Randall before. Like his name had come up just like, when I'd read books or, watched like, videos or documentaries. Um, but I had picked up a book at a bookstore that it was called what was it called? I think it was the Roswell A to Z. Oh wait, it was the Roswell Encyclopedia. I think it was called. It was like A to Z, And I was reading it, and it was just fascinating. Went from, letters A through Z, and just went through everything about Roswell, like the most like intense breakdown you could imagine from it. And and then I read the book that at the end of the book that they were like, oh yeah, Kevin Randall, he's the like world's foremost authority on like Roswell. And I was like, oh, I wonder if he would like be willing to to come on and like, talk about like his books and everything. And so, I kind of was doing some research on him, and then I saw like, that UFOs of the Deep State was his new book that had come out. And and I was like, oh, I'm definitely gonna talk with him, because it was very relevant, at the time. That was right around, with the news, when like kind of, the whole like, deep state, like phrase was kind of becoming more in vogue, in society, that it had kind of left some of the more conspiracy elements. And you would tune into CNN or Fox or MSNBC, and they just casually mention the deep state. It's like, where before you had to go to the deep dark recesses of YouTube to hear that. And so I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, do you want to come on and talk about your book? And he was more than happy, to. And yeah, just fascinating. Very intelligent guy. And for those who don't know, he has a background in the military. I believe he was a colonel, I think. And he has a doctorate as well. I believe in psychology, I think. And what I like about him the most, and I think what I enjoyed with that we talked a little bit about in the interview, was that he approaches everything from a skeptic's point of view, which I think is interesting, because in kind of the paranormal world and the UFO world, a lot of times you see people who are, true believers, and then they kind of approach it from that element. And so you're seeing kind of, they're presenting the evidence that they feel backs up, their claim. And I love that Kevin Randall doesn't do that. Like, he goes into it from like, I don't believe that this story is true, and then, he just looks for the evidence, for it. And, it's fascinating. And so because of that, I enjoy his books a lot, because, because I feel like I'm getting more of a researched angle from it. And, he'll lay out the problems with it. I remember in the Roswell A to Z, book, he interviewed, like a ton of people who were either, people who had been at Roswell, or, there was a case of like a nurse who claimed that she'd seen an alien, corpse, or whatever. And, he went through, he did all this research, and he was like, hey, I wanted this story to be real, but he's like, I can't believe it because of, and he would lay out all of the, the evidence of it. And so I always respected him, that he wasn't afraid to, to diss, a story that he hoped was real. And, he would get into it sometimes with some of the other UFOologists that were out there that, I've heard sometimes he's persona non grata at some UFO conventions, because they feel that he, because they don't like that he debunks certain things. But yeah, it was a great conversation. And I'm hoping to have him actually back on the podcast in 2026 to talk about a few other things. So
You should.
mhm.
I would definitely tune in. I mean, I would tune in
I
anyway,
hear that.
but I'm biased, so what can I say?
Appreciate that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So your podcast has been around for a little while now. And obviously, like you mentioned, you're kind of teasing that some things to come in here in the future. So what are your goals for the podcast moving forward? And what are you hoping to achieve or have already achieved?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the number one goal is, I want it to continue. I want people to be able to listen, and have a good time, is my goal. I don't want anybody to ever come and feel like I've wasted their time. I want them to feel like they've learned something, and come away with something they didn't have before. And so, in 2026, my goal is I want to grow it a little bit more. Um, and, I've been delving a little bit more into the YouTube side of podcasting. The podcast is available on every platform, but I've been seeing a huge amount of growth on like the YouTube side, now that YouTube is going into podcasts. And so, one of my goals is to grow that side of the platform, and see where it goes from there. But yeah, there's going to be a lot more guests, a lot more topics. one thing I'm planning on introducing that'll be a little bit different than what I've done before is before I'd been strictly interview, but I'm going to be kind of introducing a little bit more, I guess you could say maybe like stream of consciousness monologues a little bit to it, just kind of discussing, certain issues in the industry, probably not breaking news necessarily, but, just talking about, certain topics, so like, just an example of like what one topic would be like how recently everyone's talking about like, hey, is James Gunn going to be fired, by the new owners of Warner Brothers when they come in, those type of things that come up, I'll probably do, some discussions and, levy as much as I know about the industry and, things that I've heard, whatever, and, kind of give a viewpoint on it and, hopefully, hopefully let people know sometimes, to cut through some of the noise because, journalism today is so full of noise. And so it's like, I that's one thing I always try and do, in my writing or whatever and podcasts is, I try and give people the straight facts if I can.
That's the best way to go about it. You
Mhm.
know, lay out the facts, let people feel about it how they want to feel about it. You
Mhm.
know,
Absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah. And there's been a lot of people who disagree with me, over the years with what I've said, but I don't mind,
no,
everyone can have their
no,
opinions,
they would never disagree with you. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Uh,
For anyone who's a Facebook friend of Byron, you will know what I'm talking about.
absolutely. Yes. You will see,
Unfortunately, I should
yes,
add,
yeah,
unfortunately,
you will see some of the bloodbaths that erupt on, especially some of the Snyder posts,
just for
uh,
having an opinion.
hmm Yeah, they're definitely, there's nobody quite like Zack Snyder to elicit strong opinions from people on both sides, defenders and aggressors.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Very true.
mhm,
Well, speaking of Zack Snyder
mhm,
and DC, you also have another podcast. What
mhm.
can you tell us about that?
Yes, I have a second one called the DCEU and Me, and it is it's a little more boring than my than my main podcast in the sense that it is a more straight walkthrough of the DCEU, reviews of each of the films. The goal of the podcast really is to be the definitive podcast on the DCEU is the goal. So we do deep dives into each of the films. We talk about the pros, the cons. Obviously we're me and my co-host Curry Morris, we're huge fans of the DCEU, but we also are not scared to talk about its warts and its problems. And we've currently released 2 episodes so far, Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Both were very well received and incredibly popular. And, I'll brag on the podcast a little bit. With our second one, Batman v Superman, we actually did break into the top 2% of podcasts very briefly. I will say it wasn't like for a long time, but we did break that glass at one point. So people seem to enjoy what we're doing. Now, unfortunately, because Curry, who's my co-host, he's a film critic as well, and we both have careers, lives, families, all that, and because the podcast is a little bit more intensive, when it comes to like research and like what we do take a little bit of time in between episodes. But currently, and who knows, it might be out actually by the time this episode is released. We have finished our episode on Suicide Squad. So I'm currently just editing it right now, and so that one's going to be coming out. And we're pressing along, and our goal is to go through the entire DCEU. And also we're hoping that there might be, I don't want to give away too much, but we quite possibly might have some special guests that are going to be joining, possibly from that universe. So we'll see. Um, and asterisks, schedules allowing, but we'll see. And we also are going to have a special to be announced final episode that is going to be a topic and a film that might be a little bit unexpected, but we'll see. So we're not going to announce it right now, but it's going to be a bit of a surprise, but hopefully a good one.
That's incredible.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Oh,
Uh, and congratulations on the success of your show. I
oh,
mean, the
thank
top
you.
2%, that is very, very impressive.
Mhm.
So, um, yes, and you mentioned the first 2 episodes, Man of Steel, BBS, very well received, much like the movies themselves. So,
Uh, yes, we definitely aim to be as well received, like you said, as those films were. So,
honestly,
you know,
I hope it was better received, for your case,
uh,
and unfortunately in the movie's case because, um, well, we'll save that for a rainy day.
yeah.
But let's just say
uh,
we're both fans of those movies,
mhm,
big fans of those movies.
mhm.
And I also want to give a shout out to Curry because you guys are a good duo, a good team, and
Oh,
really fun to listen
mhm.
to. So
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. He's a lot of fun to record with. We become great friends and yeah, like he's a great guy. So yeah, definitely, anyone who listens, like check out his reviews. They're really good. He has a lot of good to say. His quote is finding the good. And so he's always a very positive film critic. So yeah, and also too, I will say to fans of the show, Darren is going to be a guest on the DCEU and Me. So so you'll have to wait and see which one, but he is going to be showing up in that show. So
can't wait.
uh
Very excited, and I know what it is
uh
to be announced. But
Mhm,
the DCEU quote unquote ended. I guess we can say a couple years ago now, right? A year or two
mhm,
ago. Um,
mhm.
Considering that it just ended, is it too soon? Pun
It's a good
intended.
question. It is honestly a good question, and it was something that, I kind of thought about because I kind of thought, like, did I wanna wait, 3, 4, 5 years, before I did it, or did I wanna do it immediately? And I was kinda talking to a couple of people, and it just really felt like the right time, honestly. And partially, one of the things that we kind of thought about that came up with some of the conversations that we had when we decided to do it was kind of closure that that a lot of us who were fans of the DCEU kind of felt this whiplash when it ended. That I remember, that, and this is what a lot of people are kind of, find a little bit amazing about me, but I tell people that I'd actually come to terms with like Cavill not being Superman anymore before Black Adam, that I was like, when the Snyder Cut came out, I was like, this is a great send off for him. He's fantastic in it. This is really good. And I wasn't really expecting him to come back. And I'd made my peace with that. And I was like, that's fine. He showed up in Black Adam again. This huge amount of excitement from everyone, the fandom, everything. He announced, Deadline announced Man of Steel 2 is in development, all this stuff. And then a month later, he's fired. It's all over with. And, there was a lot of anger, from the fandom, obviously, a lot of disappointment. I was very disappointed. And then the whole universe kind of came to this abrupt ending that didn't have an ending, I would actually say, when I say it came to an end. And so, yeah, we were kind of just saying, like, maybe this podcast can be a little bit of that closure, kind of be a celebration of this universe, talking about it, laughing, crying, discussing, dissecting. And, maybe at the end of it, once we get to that final film, we'll kind of all be ready to say goodbye, and remember the good times, with it. So
I thought we were restoring the Snyderverse. What's going on?
hey, you know what? As Larry Fong did so eloquently say on Twitter, he did say never, So and Snyder has said he would come back anytime, anywhere, to finish it. So you know, if the Snyderverse is restored or we do get extra movies, I can tell you I will be first in line with my ticket, to watch and support that. So um and and I hope we get something. I would like to uh, you know, whether it's an animated, Justice League Part 2, it's a graphic novel. Snyder himself has even said he would write a novel. He even said he said, "Hey, you know what? I'd even write a full length, novel for Justice League." Um, you know, uh, if it was any of those things, I would rejoice. If anyone from DC or Warner Brothers, listens to this episode, I'd say, hey, you know what? Just go ahead and do it. Uh, you know, we'll reward you with cash. Fans are more than happy to give you money. So we'll see. Like I said, I hope the Snyder, my dream, I would love the Snyderverse in its entirety to come back, but I'm also willing, to have a little bit of the maybe a small return in some way to give some closure to that universe and be able to see those characters off into the sunset.
I feel like I just opened a really big can of worms with that, didn't I?
Maybe just a little bit. I definitely have
Yeah.
strong opinions when it comes to the Snyderverse. But I also consider myself a bit, more reasonable as well. That obviously, having worked a little bit in the industry and, rub shoulders with some of those people and everything. I can understand the business side of things and how there can be difficulties, and everything like that. But at the same time, also, you have to reward your fans as well, because at the end of the day, there's this popular line that people say online that, when fans are demanding something and people are like, oh, you're so entitled, you're not entitled to anything. You have to let them create and whatever. And I always push back very hard against that because I have always said, films don't exist without fan bases, like you are not, unless somebody's buying tickets, purchasing it on PVOD or streaming it, you're not going to get a sequel. You're not going to have a universe. And so, you need to do right by your fan base and listen to them. Sometimes that's not necessarily giving them what they want. Sometimes it's giving them what they don't know they want. And you know, and but at the end of the day, you have to make sure your fans are happy. Otherwise, you're not going to have any more product to put out.
See, it's really interesting that you bring that up because I feel like that's true. And I
Mhm,
feel like the inverse is also true. So I feel like it's kind of a reciprocal nature to that
mhm,
process because you need, obviously, like you said, you need an
mhm,
audience
mhm,
um, to buy the tickets, to buy the art of whatever it is and to appreciate
mhm,
it, right? But at the same time, you kind of also need the filmmakers and the writers and you need the
mhm,
creatives to also make that art to be
mhm,
enjoyed. So
mhm,
it's really a two-way street, and
mhm.
one can't one has a hard time surviving without the other in a sense, in that sense,
Oh, absolutely agree. Yeah, it's very much a symbiotic relationship, and it goes for like any type of content creation or artwork. It's like you see, well, there's the starving artist in LA, who's painting his portraits, and he needs a fan base to buy them. He needs patrons, who are going to be buying them, but the patrons aren't going to have anything unless you have that creative genius who's working to create it. And so, like you said, it's very much it's a two-way street. And you don't want to ever fully go one way or the other. So it's like you can't say like the fans don't matter, and then you also can't say the filmmakers have no say. You can't be like, oh, Matt Reeves, we don't care what your script is. You have to do what the fan fiction is. Like, obviously you can't do that either. So
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
you need it's a collaborative process,
Mhm.
you need all parties,
Absolutely.
so
Mhm.
um what's your favorite DCEU movie?
Oh man, honestly, it's a tough one because there are a bunch that I like, but honestly, BVS is my favorite. I It's not only my favorite DCEU movie, but I actually think it is my favorite actual like DC movie as well. Um, followed closely, I would say probably by Man of Steel would be the second. Very very close because they're just both masterpieces. And Then honestly, I think my third one that's right up there is Wonder Woman. I love that first movie. It's so so good. But yeah, BVS is definitely on top of the mountain there of just being an absolute masterpiece of film.
Well, I believe according to your bio online, it says that you claim that movie is Batman v Superman BVS is the greatest movie of all time. So,
uh, it is one of those ones that like I truly believe it will stand the test of time. That it will be one of those movies that people revisit for decades to come, uh, because at the end of the day, and this is what I tell people, it's not a comic book movie. You know, it has comic book characters, it has comic book inspiration, but it's not a superhero movie. You know, it is a morality play. You know, it's a mythic tale. It's a, you know, a theological thriller. It's a philosophical thriller. It has all of these different elements in their political, all of it is kind of mixed up together and, you know, and then play acted by superheroes. And that's why I believe it's going to stand the test of time because it's not, in my opinion, it's not a genre film. It's just a great drama for you to watch, and and you always find something to make you think in it. And I think that's why, honestly, it didn't do super well with the critics at the time when it came out because it was not the movie people were expecting. And it was uncomfortable. It was an uncomfortable movie when you're watching it. Like there's elements of it that you're just like, you know, like, I mean, not to go down too much of a rabbit trail, but it's like the example of what I tell people that, you know, like when you look at all of the comic book movie villains and you look at, Lex Luthor from BVS, he's so different and uncomfortable from everything that, you know, you have a guy whose literal purpose is he hates God and he can't kill God. So he's killing the next best thing because he was horribly abused by his father. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, like what a dark villain story, you know, for you to have. I mean, that's like something you expect to see, you know, in like, movie Prisoners, you know, with like, Hugh Jackman or, or some like, dark indie drama. You don't expect that in your comic book films. And so,
yeah, no argument for me.
mhm,
Absolutely. You know,
mhm,
I completely agree,
mhm,
obviously. Um, yeah, it's so much more than just a superhero movie. It's so much more than, say, a popcorn flick kind of movie. Like, and there's, to be fair, there's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with a movie aiming to be that.
oh,
You know what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
Some of
Mhm,
my favorite movies are
mhm,
that, 2000s comedies
mhm.
are my jam,
Oh, yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
so, and not just that, obviously, but, um, you know, I think it just it can be so much more than that, and I think
Mhm,
because at the time that was kind of becoming the trend, obviously, what
mhm,
Marvel was kind of really capitalizing on that with, family-friendly, kid-friendly,
mhm,
and adult-friendly movies, building a universe in a way that hadn't been done before. It was insanely popular. I mean, trying to compete with that is just really, really, really insanely difficult. Not to mention Star Wars is just coming back. They were bringing back the Harry Potter franchise with Fantastic Beasts. X-Men was having their run with their prequel, First Class and X-Men, not Last Stand, but Days of Future Past. And so it was just becoming this huge, huge thing um, that there's so much franchise revivals and cinematic universes that it was just very, very hard to compete in that landscape.
mhm.
And the fact that it stands out as much as it does, I think, is a testament to Zack Snyder, and his crew that made the movie. So yeah,
Absolutely
I mean, we
agree.
could be here all day talking about this,
Yeah.
Byron. But
We absolutely could.
anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Mhm.
while we're talking about podcasting, very meta, not the Facebook version, not the Mark Zuckerberg version, the whole Jesse Eisenberg tie-in.
Mhm.
But what can you tell me about your new Star Trek podcast?
Oh, yes. So, yeah, Tachyon Transmissions is a new podcast that I just started, and funny enough, my co-host is actually the brother of Curry Morris, Jordan Morris, and he is a Trek mega fan, and very, very knowledgeable on the universe, and lots of fun to podcast with. Um, and he'd guested on Under the Lens quite a few times that were on Trek themed podcasts, and we kept always talking about, hey, we got to do this, that we got to do an episode on this, we got to do an episode on that. And then finally, I just said to him, man, I wonder if we should just spin off and like have a show on it, because I was like, before we know it, Under the Lens is going to be a Star Trek podcast, just because we had so many topics to cover. So we started Tachyon Transmissions, and uh we did a couple of episodes in the beginning, but we recently just wrapped up doing a full review of Strange New Worlds season 3, and then we took a little hiatus at the end of that, but we're actually getting ready next week to start recording again, and so we're going to be putting out more episodes on just various different Trek topics, news, the new films. There's a lot coming out with Trek. That's going to be happening over the next few years. So we have no shortage of topics that we're going to be covering.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
can't wait to hear more. I do have a question for you though.
Mhm.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Oh, that's a painful one. That's honestly painful, because I adore both universes. I've been a Star Wars fan since I was 6 years old. Um, I have to say though, I think I have to go Star Trek. Just because it's such a deep franchise, and it really dips its toe into everything. There's comedy, drama, horror, like everything is covered at some point in Trek. And what I really love about it is that, the ode, that Star Trek is always telling everything is, it's about being a better person, basically. And it's about hope and redemption, and that light shines through in the darkest of times. And so no matter how dark Star Trek always gets, they always bring it back to hope. And it's really cool. And now, without getting too much into it, you'll hear it if you listen to our podcast. We do have a lot of issues with the Kurtzman era of Star Trek. That there's some stuff we do really like about it, but there is a lot of stuff we don't like. So we're excited about what's going to be coming next. But yeah, so definitely, if you guys like Star Trek, you should check it out. It's been a really fun ride, and we're planning on putting out a lot of content in the new year.
Very cool. I do have to apologize for this. It's a very unfair question that I just asked you. So it's
Uh,
totally fair to enjoy both.
uh,
There does no need for this division with fandoms and everything like that.
mhm,
You can enjoy both. It's actually better if you enjoy both, honestly, if you
mhm.
really think
It's
about
true.
it. So
It's true, because then you have twice the content to consume. So,
yes,
Mhm,
absolutely. So, we've been talking a lot about movies and filmmaking and whatnot. And I believe, if memory serves me correct, you were a part of the marketing team or the marketing department for a religious film,
yes.
just in the somewhat recent future or
Mhm,
recent future.
mhm.
Look at me, recent past. What can you tell me about that experience?
Yeah, that was, honestly, that was a really fun one. Yeah, because my day job is in corporate marketing, and so it crosses over quite frequently, into my career, as a critic and journalist and podcaster. And yeah, so I got to take part in the marketing for, it was Lionsgate's Jesus Revolution. And also with their recent show, House of David. I got to participate with that one too. Um, and very, very, very interesting, because the marketing of films and TV shows is like a world unto itself. And so it's very interesting seeing how you have to target audiences, how you have to, make sure basically, who you want to see your film or TV show sees it. And unfortunately, because of that, it kind of takes away some of the magic, of when it comes to film trailers and everything, because it's kind of the whole idea of, like, you see how the sausage is made, kind of. that I remember, when like people were like, "Oh yeah, Superman has the highest views of all time," of a trailer, and I was like, I can't get excited because I know how they did it. So, it's like, and it's just, and it's just it's a natural thing, and I'm not trying to say like Warner Brothers was unethical or anything like that. It's just, all studios have, their marketing campaigns of how they get people to watch their stuff. And so unfortunately, before I was in marketing with that, I had a lot more of just that kind of wonder and amazement, that you have as a fan. And so, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, uh, I worked with the team with Jesus Revolution of the subject of the film actually. So it was Greg Laurie that I worked with his team a lot. With kind of deciphering, my kind of the side that I worked on with the marketing of it was how to reach the faith-based audiences. So, trying to, because obviously it's a faith-based film. Personally, and I'm a little bit biased, but I think even somebody who was not a person of faith could still find a lot to enjoy in the movie because it was, an interesting kind of story of, just an individual who kind of went from, having a really bad life, to kind of turning it around. But yeah, I worked on, just kind of getting it out in front of church going audiences, people who watch, like Angel Studios, Pure Flix, that kind of stuff. Working on some of those partnerships, with, those other studios and everything to kind of help get eyes on it. And it was a very similar experience with House of David as well. So and Actually, and I will say too, I was very proud of this with House of David that uh one of the trailers that I released for it that I was in charge of kind of, helping some of the smaller YouTube channels, release the trailers that were kind of, to help people. And and the one trailer that I helped with one of the partners actually surpassed for a while the Prime trailer. So I was kind of proud of that. I was like, okay, I'm doing my job as a marketing person, to be able to surpass Amazon Prime. So, um, but yeah, it was a great experience, and one that I'll remember for a while.
I'm really happy for you, man. That's
Mhm,
that's really cool.
mhm. Oh, thank
That's
you.
really
Mhm,
awesome. So, how do you determine your target demographic? Like what kind of marketing tactics do you use to help like promote a film or a TV show that you're working on? Like, can you walk me
mhm.
through that process?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, very technical. Because you're looking at market research, so you're looking at trying to figure out like, who are you targeting, so is it somebody who is, white males 55 and over, are you after, so you're looking at basically that kind of thing. So I'll use the example for Jesus Revolution because that one was I think the one that was a little bit more challenging in the sense, because House of David is kind of a, high stakes, Game of Thrones style thing. So it's a little bit less of a task, to get people to come and watch, sword and sandals type thing, versus something that more like Jesus Revolution. But yeah, so basically, on the marketing side with me, what we did was we looked at we worked with like Greg Laurie and we, basically kind of said like, what is your audience, because he has a very, very large, mega church out here in Southern California and his national audience is just astronomically huge. And so what we kind of did was we kind of looked at and I kind of said to him, we were like, okay, what's your audience? So we looked at, okay, is it, male, female, black, white, Hispanic, we kind of looked at that. And then we kind of zeroed in on what the demographic was that were primarily his viewers, his donors, all that kind of stuff. And then we fed them content basically. And so, so we worked with, we had like Jonathan Rumi, for example. He played Lonnie Frisbee in Jesus Revolution. and he came out to Greg Laurie had done a big stadium event in Anaheim, and we had Jonathan Rumi came out on stage and did an interview with him, and and they kind of talked about the experience, and Greg talked about his experiences in the actual Jesus Revolution back in the 70s, and he talked about his experiences with the real life guy who Jonathan was playing. We had the directors and producers kind of do an interview as well, kind of excited people. And we kind of pushed to try and make a lot of the faith-based audience to kind of be stakeholders, and so it was kind of like, getting them to share content, getting them to, to tell people about it, so we would have different events, we would have, different, so we'd be like, sneak peeks, for example. So like, at some of the events, we'd be like, hey, here's a never before seen 2-minute scene of the baptism or whatever, and and it would get people excited, and we would see then those people would go tell their friends and family, and it was a ripple effect. And and we also kind of played into the historical aspect as well, that we were kind of selling it not just as a religious film, but as a historical movie. So we were like, hey, this is something that really happened. This was a movement that was all across the country, had millions of people involved in it. And we kind of sold it as that, of like, hey, you know what, these are flawed people. We played into the element of, kind of that idea of how people are like, Christians being perfect or, having perfect lives. We kind of played into that of like, hey, here's kind of a real story of people who were in the faith-based community and they were really messed up, and, a lot of, drugs, alcoholism, a bunch of other stuff, that are showcased, very openly, in the film. And Greg Laurie was he pushed for that. He was like, he was like, I want this to be the real story. I don't want this to be whitewashed. I want you to showcase the problems these people had. And we pushed that, we just told people, hey, come and see a real story of people overcoming odds and, who lived hard lives. And, and it, as we can see from the box office, it resonated. And we had a large amount of the faith-based audience come out to see it. And we also had a lot of them bring friends and family, who maybe wouldn't have seen the movie on their own, that they went along. So
Congratulations. That's really cool
thank
to
you.
hear about.
Mhm.
Um, that actually brings me back to, when I was younger, I know when God's Not Dead first came out.
Mm.
That one,
Yes.
I remember that one blowing up being a huge deal,
Hmm.
I think Dean Cain was in that movie, right?
He was, yes. Yeah, I believe Dean Cain
Yeah.
was, and I'm trying to remember, there was a Kevin Sorbo, I think, was also in it, I believe. I think he was the
Yeah.
villain of it, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Until
Hmm.
the end.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
uh,
And then I know there was a documentary that came out a year or two ago that um was kind of it was kind of a controversial one. And of course now I'm blanking on the name of it now. I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about. Um, but it was about um it was controversial in the sense because it was kind of being held under wraps, I believe, by Disney for a long time, and then they finally got to release it. I don't know if it was Angel Studios, but it was kind of a smaller, similar one as that. But it was kind of about like trafficking and
yes. Hmm.
slavery and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I know that became a big topic, and it became like a big movie.
Hmm.
And of course, I personally I haven't seen it. I meant to see it. I just never got a chance to.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Sound of Freedom. Yes. Hmm.
yes, yes,
Hmm.
thank you. Um,
Hmm.
uh, what are your thoughts on that one?
That was a fascinating movie, honestly. It was an example of what I call of the best and worst of marketing. That it was like the marketing was incredibly successful, for that film, because obviously, I mean, I want to say it did almost 250 million domestically, I believe. It was massive. Like, it was just or I might be wrong, maybe it was closer to 200 million, I can't remember. But yeah, it was extremely successful. And what was fascinating about that movie was that, it was filmed, I want to say around like 2017, 2018, and then like you said, it was sat on for a while. Starred Jim Caviezel, of Passion of the Christ fame. And it kind of became synonymous with the QAnon movement that came about. It got really in the trenches with politics, which was partially what kind of drove it to be the huge success that it was. That when you watch the movie is very apolitical. Like there's really like a lot of people who were going to see it were expecting like a MAGA Trump type movie. But really, when you see it, it's a straight up thriller. It's about a guy who's going after human traffickers and saving, kids basically. And, I mean, you would think as uncontroversial that it would be the least controversial movie, that you could imagine, like Taken. It's a,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but what I suspect now, I don't have, full, I can't say this is exactly what 100% what happened, but I suspect, kind of looking at it from the marketing side, that some of the people behind the film on the distribution side kind of gauged the political atmosphere at the time, and they kind of thought, hey, maybe we can kind of piggyback on this and get people of a certain political persuasion to go and see this movie if they think it's kind of connected to it, basically. And it was wildly successful. Jim Caviezel was going onto all of these podcasts, doing it, and it was, whipping people up, and it got all of them to go out and see it. And, it also created a lot of controversy on the other side, because you had the other side of the political sphere who then kind of became opposed to the movie, saying, okay, it's conspiracy theories, it's this and that, and I kind of felt bad for a lot of the people who were involved with the movie, because the director himself, I remember, kind of came out at the height of the controversy where he said, I didn't even know what QAnon was until this movie released. Like he said, literally, I filmed this as a thriller about a guy who was trying to stop human trafficking. He said, and he basically said, I'm not a political guy. The movie's not political. This has been hijacked by all of this stuff, and his voice kind of got lost in the noise of all of it. But I will say I congratulate the marketing team on it, because by wading into the political atmosphere of it, they took a film that probably would have only made maybe 25, 30 million, and they pushed it to be, a $200+ million grossing movie that was wildly successful. So, I'm not going to criticize them. They did their job, and it
Yeah.
was successful. So, and I will tell people too, it's a good movie. So, whatever side of the political spectrum you fall on, check it out. It's I had one person who actually watched it that they said that they felt the third act was as close as probably we'll get to a Metal Gear Solid adaptation. So, so yeah, it was fascinating.
Absolutely. And are you working on any marketing for any other movies, TV shows at the moment?
Currently not at the moment right now. I'm still doing some work in the faith-based realm for different things. But currently right now, I don't have anything necessarily. We just kind of wrapped up a little bit of some stuff for season 2 of House of David, where we helped out a bit with that. And so that one's just wrapped up. But yeah, in 2026, we might possibly I might be working on something. So there's been some rumblings of a certain documentary that might be coming out that I might be doing some work on. So
I can't wait to hear more. We've talked about you as a podcaster. We've talked about you as in the marketing field. You're also an author.
I am,
So
yes. Uh-huh.
you recently published a poetry collection. What was that process like for writing poetry? Like, why poetry?
Oh yeah, so that's an interesting one. I've always been interested in poetry. I've always liked it. from back when I was a kid and I read the Iliad by Homer, and I loved it and just devoured it. And so I was always kind of interested, and but I never thought I was good enough to write poetry. Honestly, that I was like, oh, you have to be a certain type of person for that. And I was like, oh, and I just never really even tried, and and then it was I remember it was actually what got me started. It was one day I was looking online and I saw this thing that popped up that said like, oh, we're looking for poetry submissions for, it was a magazine that was doing a whole spread on the Odyssey. And I thought, hey, you know what, I might be kind of interested. And I wrote something in about a half an hour, and it was a short poem about Odysseus on the Isle of Calypso. And I kind of did this short thing where I tied it in with like, him having PTSD flashbacks, to the siege of Troy and all this different stuff. And I thought it was pretty good. Of course, it was denied by the magazine because you never get accepted on your first try. Thankfully, it was actually published by a poetry journal a couple of months later. But after that, I kind of just, I felt like, hey, you know what? I got one published. And I was like, I wonder if I can keep doing this, And so I just kind of kept at it. I kept writing, and kind of before I knew it, I had, a chapbook worth, of poetry. And there was this publisher that was out of Mumbai, India, called Poet's Choice, and they're one of the larger publishers that do poetry. And they were offering, an opening for you to submit, chapbooks, to see if you would be accepted. And you know, so I went in, I made some additions to my chapbook. I added a fictional introduction, prologue and epilogue to it that kind of was a little bit of a narrative pull to kind of like tie, the story a little bit together. And submitted it, and a couple of weeks later, they reached out to me and they offered me a publishing deal and said, "Hey, we'd like to put it out there." So it was very exciting. It was my first published work, and it was great. I really liked it. It's a mythic poetry chapbook, so it deals with you know humankind, their relationship with gods and deities and monsters and everything. And just kind of, it tackles all elements of mythology too. So I have Greek stuff in there. I have stuff from, Asian mythology. I also have some like some biblical stuff in there too. I have a section that I fondly call an existentialist take on the Book of Revelation. So, but it was a lot of fun to write, and I'm actually I have a second chapbook that's actually finished that I'm currently shopping around to publishers. So hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe we'll see if that gets published in 2026.
I can't wait. I keep
Yeah,
saying it,
sure.
but it's true. I can't wait.
No, no.
I hear
Hey,
you.
hey,
You're
you know what?
also. Oh, sorry.
I'll send.
Sorry. Go
Oh, I
ahead.
was gonna say I'll send you a copy of my chapbook. So,
Sweet.
mhm.
Thank you in advance. I hear you're also working on a short story collection.
Yeah, so actually it's kind of interesting how that kind of merged. It originally was a short story collection, and it's actually now turned into a novel. And it is actually completed right now. So it's in the process of, I'm editing it right now. So that's a long and arduous task. But basically, it's a science fiction series called The Twilight Walker. And I started it in 2011, and it started with one short story. And I slowly started adding more to it. And it was, this kind of story set in a universe, basically. So each one was kind of separate, standalone. They had a beginning, middle, and end. And there would maybe be references, to maybe some of the characters who were in other ones, but overall they were very standalone. Uh, then I kind of just realized I was like, this is an interesting world. I was really enjoying living in it, with the characters. And, and I found myself kind of writing more short stories about the individual characters. So instead of it being, individual stories, they started kind of, linking together a little bit more. And so at the end of the day, I said, I'm going to see if I can turn this into a novel. I'm going to see. And so I started working on it. It took a long time, on and off. I'd set it down, and pick it up over the years. But I'm happy to say, it is it's a full length novel now. And I warn people, it is a different kind of novel. The layout is different than what you might expect. It's not like a traditional novel, and I'm kind of proud of that. So it is different. And one thing that I added at kind of at last minute, just because you know, I did kind of a Zack Snyder, like when he was doing Rebel Moon and he talked about how he wrote an entire Bible, of like, what was it, 600 years of history or something like that, that I found I was referencing all of these events kind of within the novel. And I was kind of writing notes about what these events were. And so I ended up deciding to, take a note from his book and from Tolkien, and I included a lengthy appendices at the end of the novel, um, and they, it very much is narratives about the characters, their backstories, some of the organizations, the cults that are, that inhabit the world, the governments, some of the heroes and villains, and, just the history of what happened in the world and stuff that, you might get a reference, about this cataclysm that happened, on Mars, that's maybe a throwaway line, and so in the appendices, I go into a little bit more detail and tell people about it. So, um, it's not mandatory reading. If you don't like appendices, you can read the novel and you can get everything out of it, and I think you'll enjoy it. But if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, you can go into those appendices and have some fun.
Yeah, I was going to ask you since you brought that up. So, as someone who is an author and a professionally certified book editor,
hmm
uh, hearing you describe that is very fascinating because how do you specifically balance between, yes, you have all this lore and world building and mythology that you've done for this novel.
hmm
How do you balance that as opposed to telling readers what they need to know and not absolutely everything and a lot of exposition dump
hmm
and getting it too bogged down? How do you balance that with a tight narrative that functions really well from a pacing point of view, as opposed to world building and that process, I guess? How do you balance both of those?
That's a great question. Yeah, because it is so true that you have to be so careful when you're writing a novel. Because if your exposition dumps are too large, you lose people. If this element of lore that you find so fascinating, but maybe the reader does not find fascinating, you're going to lose them. And and it can be really difficult as an author because you love everything that's in your book and you think everything is important. And so you're trying to figure out, well, what do I cut? What do I include? What do I do? And honestly, that was kind of where some of the appendices came from, was because I was realizing that some of the stuff I wanted to include in the novel wasn't strictly necessary. That like I would be writing this one character who, was talking about, this one war that had erupted between these religious cults. And like I said, I found it very interesting of him talking about, all the wars and what had happened and what triggered it and this kind of geopolitical stuff. But then I kind of realized I was like, this doesn't serve the story. Like the reader doesn't need to know this. Like all they need to know is who these basic organizations were and what, and that they're opposed to each other and that they cause problems. But that was really all you needed to know because the characters were going in another direction. And and so I was like, well, I'm still interested in telling this. And I was like, and I think people will get more out of it, knowing about what was actually going on with them. And so that's kind of where I was like, well, what if I do an appendices where I can go into more detail about these, but it's not necessary for the story itself? Because what I wanted to do was I kept my novel on the shorter side, so it's not, it's not 150,000 words or anything like that. Um, I wanted it to be a, page turning, you know, exciting story that people would just be, moving through at a breakneck pace. So I didn't want to bog people down at all. And so there's action scenes, there's a lot of philosophical elements to it as well. Uh, but at the end of the day, I wanted people to enjoy themselves and I wanted them to move along. So I would try and put myself into the headspace of a reader. And I try and think, well, what do I enjoy reading? And I remembered kind of reading The Hobbit, that I was like, The Hobbit is like a thrill a minute when you're reading it. It like literally something is happening on every page. And all of his world building is put very delicately in, where he mentions this, he mentions that, but everything is in the service of them moving to the next step of the story. And so I tried to make sure that I kept myself doing that. I was like, okay, don't get bogged down. You need to move along with the story and only put the exposition that is needed for that scene.
Are you working with a publisher or are you publishing independently?
Currently, right now, I don't have a publisher. I'm shopping it around to like some independent ones, but I might end up publishing it independently. Just because I'm kind of interested, and this kind of goes back to the nerd in me with marketing, that I'm kind of interested to see if I can make it a success with my marketing skills, with ads and everything like that. That with Meta, with Google, with everything, the ability to target with marketing is so advanced now that I'm kind of curious. And I'm like, I might try, with self-publishing and see what I can do. Because I've self-published a few things before. I've self-published a novella and some short stories before, but this is my first like large-scale work. So I'm not going to say no to traditional publishing. I am gonna see about see if some places are interested. But I'm also curious with the independent, because independent publishing now, it's not as hard to get a hit as it used to be.
Very true. That's very true.
Mhm.
So how should I phrase this? Um, can you provide a status update on your Jericho nonfiction book?
Mm. Oh, yeah. So this is a fascinating one. Yeah. So I am currently writing a nonfiction book on the CBS television show Jericho, which ran from 2006 to 2008. It was a post-apocalyptic show about a small town that found itself basically surviving a nuclear holocaust that basically topples the entire United States. And they find themselves basically within the clear zone where there's no radiation, there's nothing, and they're safe, and there's no damage to the town at all. They have their lives intact. And they're trying to basically find their place in this new world, and also unravel the conspiracy of who was behind these attacks. It's a very, very good show. I highly recommend people to see it. It only ran for 2 seasons and it was canceled. It does have an ending though, so I tell people that you're going to get a somewhat conclusive ending to it, while opening it up for more. But anyway, so I decided, I'd always been a huge part of the Jericho fandom, and for years I'd covered a lot of it in articles and essays that I'd written, that were quite popular with the fandom, and a lot of the producers and people had read them and liked them too. And so I was kind of like, one day I was kind of thinking about it, and I was like, man, I've written probably like 10,000 words, of like Jericho over the course of my career with these articles. And I was like, I wonder if I should write a book about it, because I was like, there's not a huge amount out there about like the making of it. And, you know, um, kind of the story and the world that it had created. And so I started interviewing people who were part of the show. I talked to John Turteltaub and Dan Schatz, of Percy Jackson fame, and a huge amount of the producers and writers and everything. And I'm moving into now the cast interviews. So But it's been an experience, honestly. Probably one of the hardest projects that I've worked on, I would say, just because uh, there's a lot of pressure on because there's a fandom that is excited about it and wants to read it, and I want to make sure I deliver on that. Uh, but it's deciding what to include, how to do it narratively is very interesting. But the plan for the release of it is it's going to be releasing in 2026. And the current plan is that it's going to be released most likely in either May or June of next year is the plan. And we're probably going to be doing a panel at San Diego Comic-Con on the book. And it's also coinciding the release with a anniversary for Jericho. I want to say, I think it's the 20th anniversary of the show. And so there's some of the fans are talking about, and some of the producers have talked about possibly doing like a 20th anniversary panel on the show itself there. And so the book release is going to be timed with that. Yeah, so I'm gonna probably be doing a lot of interviews and rounds, closer once it comes out, but it's been a very rewarding project, and gonna be one that I remember my whole life.
That sure sounds like it, Byron. That's
Mhm,
amazing.
mhm. Yeah, it's good. There's gonna be a lot of fun stories in there too. There's a lot of interesting things that have never been told before, about the show. Gonna be a lot of emotional elements, with the one cast member who recently passed away. There's a lot of stories about him and everything, and so yeah, so it's gonna be good. So definitely, encourage people if you enjoy. Like, I would even say, like, you can read the book without even having seen the television show. It covers everything you need to know. If you're into behind the scenes elements of like how filmmaking is done and TV shows are done, I think you would enjoy the book. So, but everybody, you should go watch Jericho. It's a great show.
Where can people find it online?
So the show is streaming on Paramount Plus currently. It's an exclusive on there, and runs, I believe, 30 episodes. I think. So it's an easy binge, and very much a character drama. So as much as the conspiracy and the action side of it is a part of the show, um, I what I like to do is I liken it a lot to Lost, in the sense of how people always talk about the reason they liked Lost was the characters, not necessarily where or what was the smoke monster. And Jericho's very similar with that they really flesh out their characters very well. They flesh out their world building that, by the time you get to the end of the show, the characters feel like friends, and you really enjoy, the time that you spent with them. So,
One question I have
mhm,
about the topic is, you've mentioned there's going to be a 20-year anniversary panel at San Diego
mhm,
Comic-Con,
mhm.
and you might be there. So that just is incredible. But, and you talk about, the making of this, and you mentioned the name John Turtletop, and that
Mhm.
alone gets me excited because of his previous works, which
Uh-huh.
I'm sure we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
Um, so it's fascinating that there's gonna be so much coverage for this, and I'm
Mhm,
very, very excited for you and very happy for
mhm,
you. But you mentioned the show only lasted 2 seasons and only has about
mhm,
30 episodes.
mhm,
For a show to have that kind of notoriety,
mhm,
and it's a show that I'm not personally familiar with, that I need to
mhm,
catch up on. Uh, can you at least provide a tease for
mhm.
why it only lasted 2 seasons?
Yeah, so it was very interesting, that the show came out with pretty strong ratings, and it unfortunately was a victim of being one of the early shows that was serialized. So we had 24, we had some of those other shows. Lost was just starting. Um, but people were very used to case of the week, monster of the week type shows. And, having a TV program that was for the most part, completely serialized, was a little bit difficult for people to swallow at the time, with network TV. It also had a lot of problems with the network, changing its dates of when it would air, taking it off the air for like I believe it was like a 4-month break at one point that really just killed the momentum that it had been building. Um, and so it was very sad kind of what happened, but kind of what made the show famous was that it really wrote the book on fan campaigns. That I would go so far as to say that like the release the Snyder Cut campaign owes a lot to the Jericho campaign, because when the show was first canceled after season 1, the fans all rallied together and did a massive fan campaign to save it. They were sending bags of nuts to CBS. And that's basically that is discussed in the book, where there is a reference in the show about nuts, basically. And so they grabbed onto that, and they were literally sending thousands of pounds of nuts to the corporate offices. Like the offices were being buried in like bags of nuts. It was really funny. And basically it just got so big, the fan campaign, that they reversed it and they brought it back for a second season. And with the ratings and everything of what was going on with the show, no one really expected it to go past 2 seasons, which is why they kind of wrote it as having a conclusion. But the campaign was massive, and the interesting thing was this was before social media. So this was all using email. This was using message boards on CBS.com. And it was fascinating. Like I said, it was one of the first, if not the first. Well, I would say probably it wasn't the first, because Star Trek had some campaigns that were very successful. But it was one of the first, I would say, ones where fans brought something back from the dead. And like I said, it was kind of what put it into the annals of where this fandom kind of grew around it, and it was successful, and made it into the news a lot, where at one point actually, like, Netflix was trying to buy the rights to the show to do a revival of it, actually. And I talk a little bit about that in the book too, and why that wasn't successful. But yeah, it's a very interesting story, the narrative of the program itself.
Wow, I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to watch the show. I
Yeah.
can't wait to learn more.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
congratulations in advance on
Uh-huh.
that as well.
Yeah.
So obviously we've talked about you as a writer, as an author. Part of that is also with your journalism career.
Yeah.
So to start with, you are the chief editor and resident film critic for a website called Viral Hair.
Mhm.
Where does the name come from? What is the website about? What's going
Uh,
on?
yeah, so yeah, I started out, in journalism in college. I was a staff writer for my college newspaper. Um, and it was a lot of fun. It kind of gave me the bug for writing, and then it ended up, I just kind of like I took some time off, when I was in grad school, and a bunch of stuff, and then I finally kind of was like, hey, I want to get back into this, and then I started writing for lots of different sites and everything, and just kind of like building up my my writing resume, basically. And there was a friend of mine was living in Taipei, Taiwan at the time, and he was like, "Hey Byron," he's like, "Do you want to start a viral news site?" And I was like, "What's that?" And at the time, viral news sites were kind of, very large at the time. There was all kinds of sites, like, you'd hear like, viral cow or whatever, and it was basically these kind of short, bite-sized bits of news that you would write. And so Viral Hair kind of grew out of that trend, basically. And in the beginning, it was a viral news site. Over time, we kind of changed it and moved it over to being more of a straight entertainment site, where we did film criticism and news. We have lots of interviews on there. We have a huge amount of interviews from our various staff writers. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it kind of being editor of it, it kind of gives me the chance to write about whatever I want, really. So I had a column on there, and it was a lot of fun, and we still are going pretty strong with it. And I'm working as an editor with another site too right now called 25 Years Later. That's more of a straight film film criticism and analysis. But I keep Viral Hair. I still like writing my viral news on there occasionally on there, and my editorials. Sometimes some of my long form editing, on my long form analysis on Zack Snyder or different stuff like that goes on Viral Hair.
It's good stuff.
Mhm.
So when did you start writing for Viral Hair, and how long have you been writing there?
We are actually approaching our 10-year anniversary for Viral Hair. We started in 2016, and we've gone through a lot of ups and downs, honestly, as with any site. We've had times where we've had 2 writers, and we've had other times where we had 15, going. And so it's like
Wow.
it goes, yeah, it goes up and down. It's the never-ending struggle of finding people who want to write and are willing to write. And a lot of times people will come on and they'll write for, maybe 3 or 4 months, and then, they'll drift off and somebody else will come in. But yeah, it's continuing on. I don't really have any plans to stop, with Viral Hair. It's kind of my pet project on the side of what I like to write about. And unfortunately, the print side of journalism is slowly dying, unfortunately. And it's not what it used to be. Everything now is switching over to audio and video now, with podcasts and video podcasts and everything. But there still is a niche out there of people who like to read their news and who like to read their analysis. And so Viral Hair and 25 Years Later, both of them, we try and service that niche as well as we can.
Do you still write for Film Obsessive?
I do not. No. I left Film Obsessive probably about maybe a year and a half ago or so. I still do occasionally guest write for TV Obsessive, but mostly besides Viral Hair, I write for 25 Years Later now, which was part of that family of sites.
Sure. Okay. Nice. Um, I guess my next question is, are you a verified Rotten Tomatoes film critic?
I am not, unfortunately. I have a an interesting relationship with Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, I believe it.
So yeah, like I have a love-hate with them, honestly, because I understand the service that they provide, and they do provide a good service. Unfortunately, I also think that they have contributed to some of the downfall of film criticism. And I don't believe it was done maliciously. I don't believe it was done on purpose or anything like that. It was just, more that they were offering some new innovative ideas. And then those new innovative ideas, unfortunately, got twisted into something that they weren't intended to be. So for example, I can use like the tomato meter. I do not like the tomato meter where it's fresh or rotten, because unfortunately people don't actually read the reviews. They just look at whether something is fresh or rotten. That being said, Rotten Tomatoes, like I said, serves its purpose. It's not a bad site at all. I just wish that maybe there would be some additional changes. That being said, I do hope that I will be becoming hopefully a verified critic on there. Hopefully in 2026, we'll see.
Nice. Yeah, no, it's a review aggregate site. They're not getting paid off by Disney or anything like
Mhm.
that.
Oh
I know
yeah.
that's been the rumor for a long time. I think Warner
uh,
Brothers owns it, so I mean,
yeah.
it's kind of silly to when you really think
Uh,
about it. But
No,
um,
it's true, and they've been what I have been impressed by too is they are really trying to improve things on their side. I think they kind of realize that they ventured too far away from film criticism and were kind of becoming more reactionary with their reviews. And I've noticed lately that they really are trying to push for the more analytical and deep analysis. And so I was pleased to hear that. So so they like I said, I think they're a good site and they're a good team that's running it, and and they love movies and they love films. So that's what's important.
yeah, does Peacock still show the tomato percentage for each movie that's on there?
It does, yes. Uh-huh.
Oh, see,
Hmm.
I wish they wouldn't do that, because I feel like that's going to turn more people off from watching stuff. and maybe they would
Mhm.
like that, but because they see that, they're not going to watch it, and then that's only hurting their own streaming service. So I don't understand why they're doing that.
I really don't
It's
either. It does not make sense to me because, the rotten and fresh rating, itself is very, some movies are great. Like Rotten Tomatoes actually even has a podcast about the scores that got it wrong. Where they actually talk about how a movie that is good that was still rated as rotten. And so yeah, I do not understand why Peacock does that because like you said, it's going to turn some people off because some people are like, "Oh, this is a bad movie. I'm not watching it." And so yeah, it was whoever came up with that idea, I don't think it was the best one.
no, definitely, yeah, no, and yeah, I don't understand it, but
Mhm.
that's just but then again, you see it all the time in marketing. If a movie's doing well, they're gonna show that. They're gonna be like, it's
Mhm.
Rotten Tomatoes certified fresh, and it's
Mhm.
got 90%. You better go see it because it's actually good. Here's the
Mhm.
proof. And if it doesn't do well with critics, then you won't see anything about it. They'll use a
Uh,
snippet from a review and
yeah.
it'll be like a review site you've never even heard of, but it'll be in like the tiniest font. And then in the
Mhm.
big font, it'll be like the most amazing movie of the year.
Oh,
Of course,
uh-huh.
I'm not being fair, obviously. To
No.
I'm having fun with it, but
Yeah, it is
you
true.
know,
I always said, honestly, and this was one thing that I always felt was a missed opportunity with Rotten Tomatoes, was that the first Suicide Squad had an abysmal Rotten Tomatoes score, and it was very much rotten. I always said that I thought Warner Brothers should have leaned into that because of the nature of the Suicide Squad being bad guys. That I think in all of their TV spots and trailers, they should have advertised the movie as rotten, and they should have said like rotten, just like the team. It's like and I think it
huh?
would have been a genius marketing move. I think it was a missed opportunity. I think.
I never thought of it that way, but that very well could have worked.
Yeah, would have been a way to try and turn it around. And who knows, it might not have worked, but I think it would have been worth a try.
Hey, it had to be better than Morbius,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. uh,
Yeah, actually, that's funny because Jared Leto's in both of those movies, isn't he?
he is. Yes. Uh-huh.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was poor Jared Leto. He does not have a good agent when it comes to movies.
No, and he's a
Mhm.
great actor, and he's been in a lot of good stuff.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then again, they also been in a lot of stuff that has not done so well. I think the most recent Tron movie, I think, is the most recent example of that. So,
hmm Absolutely.
but speaking of critics, and critic rating and Rotten Tomatoes and all that fun stuff, I will say, in the age of influencers that we're living in right now, we could use a few more Siskel and Eberts. So,
Absolutely agree. I cannot agree with you more.
and Byron, I would be remiss to reveal, or should I say, talk about on here that you are the founder and chairman of the esteemed Independent Film Critics of America.
That is very true. Yes. Uh-huh.
So, what inspired you to start the IFCA, as it's referred to, in its abbreviated form?
Yeah, it was honestly like, I was looking at a bunch of like different film critic groups and I'd applied to a few different ones and got accepted to some and I was kind of looking around at them and I was just kind of realizing how many of them were location locked, that it was, the LA film critics or the Houston film critics or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, at all. Like it's great to have those groups. But I suddenly realized that there really wasn't a lot of organizations that were for an entire country, for the most part. That you would maybe have like a film critic organization for women, or for minorities or something like that. But then I was like, there's no like film critics of America, I realized. And then I kind of was digging down and I was researching and thinking a little bit more and I was like, there's nothing, almost nothing for independent film critics, that I was seeing a lot of these, film critics who were working really hard that had small audiences. So there was a friend of mine who was a film critic. He has a YouTube channel. And, he works really hard on his reviews, and he has great reviews. Like, he has great insight, everything. And for one reason or another, the YouTube algorithm just has never grabbed him. And, so, he doesn't get a huge amount of views on his videos. I think he has about 1,200 subscribers or so, and like I said, he keeps plugging away, he keeps working at it. And I was sad because I was thinking, like, someone like him is never going to be accepted into a critic group, because they have, all these rules that, like, oh, you need to be at a big publication, or, oh, you have to have 100,000 views, on your channel a month or something like that. And I realized how flawed I thought that thinking was, because I was like, someone like this guy has a lot to offer, and whenever I watch his reviews, I get something out of it. And I was like, someone like him deserves to have a community and, deserves to be able to be around other people. And so that was kind of where the creation of IFCA kind of came from, that I was like, what if we create an organization that is kind of about diversity of film criticism, that you can be a large independent critic who has a giant, website that has 1 million views, a month, or you can be a small YouTube channel. But as long as you're providing worthy content, that your quality is really good, you deserve it. And so that was what inspired it, and, we launched about 3 years ago, I think, I want to say, or maybe 4. We might be going on 4. We've been growing every year. So I think we just hit 70 film critics so far. So we are now the largest independent film critic organization. So I'm very happy to be able to say that. And like I said, it's all due to the great film critics that we have. And we have a really good board of directors too, who help run it. We have some people on there who I wanted to make sure that I had people who were helping me who were experts in their field. So I went around and I looked, and so I got like Scott Menzel from the what used to be known as the Hollywood, I think it was the Hollywood Film Critics Association, I think, and I think it's the I can't remember what it's called now. They recently rebranded. He's on the board. We have a film critic from Variety, who is on our board as well, Joe Linden, who's a great guy, and we have a few others as well. But yeah, it's been a wild journey. We have a filmmaker in residence we choose every year. We've had some fairly large names, within the film and TV industry, who've been on there, and it's been, like I said, it's been a journey. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm honored, to have created a space, for people who didn't have a space before, for them to hone their craft and network with other people who are like them.
That's incredible. So what are the goals for the future for the IFCA?
Yeah, so first off, we want to keep growing. So like I said, we hit 70 film critics, and we want to double that as soon as possible. And so in 2026, we're going to be launching some initiatives to try and get a little bit more attention on us. We also are going to be launching something that's kind of exciting, that is probably going to be a little bit controversial. But we are opening we have several levels of membership, so we have full members, we have associate members. We're creating a new level of membership called Letterbox members, that we were kind of looking around, and we were seeing how there's a lot of film critics who are exclusive to Letterbox, who write like 1,000-word reviews sometimes, and these are like in-depth, really good reviews, and they only write about it on Letterbox. They don't have websites, they don't have anything. And so we're going to open a new level of membership on there for people who are exclusively to Letterbox, that they can join the organization. There are some limits, of course, like they're not going to be voting members, so they won't be voting in our IFCA awards or anything like that. But the goal will be for them to join our organization and hopefully be mentored, in the level of film criticism, and, and possibly get them, some some jobs, either writing or doing videos or whatever, and just kind of helping them develop their film criticism hobby or career or whatever their goals are. So that's going to be coming in 2026, and we're very excited about that.
You are an innovator, Byron.
Oh, thank you. Aw.
So, how does someone join the IFCA if they're interested? Like, how would they go about that process?
Yeah, so if you go online and you just put in Independent Film Critics of America, you can go to our website, and we have a tab on the website that's called Membership. So you just click on that, and the different levels of membership are listed on there, as well as the requirements in order to join. So we have a full member and an associate member. And they each have a certain number of reviews, that you need to either be doing a year, a month, different, quality control type things. Overall, it's not egregious, so you don't have to have like 500 reviews or something like that in order to join. But we are looking for people who are active, and who are consistently putting out content. But our membership acceptance period rolls throughout the year, so feel free to go and put your application in, and we have a lot of applicants that we have to review, so it might take a few months to get to you, but we will get back to you. So every single person who applies will get a response from us, and if that is bad news where we're not able to accept you at the time, we will tell you exactly why, and we'll provide you a path to say what you need to do in order to get you in as a member, because we want as many people as possible. So yeah, and we have more information on the site. You can check all of our members. We have critic pages for everybody, so you can see everywhere they've written, where they do write, so you can follow them. And we also have a list of our, all of our past awards that we do, the yearly IFCA awards, and you can learn more about our filmmaker in residence as well.
Absolutely. And I also want to give a shout out to, I believe, who a member who is, at least at one point, was a member, and I hope he still is. He used to go by Dan Marcus, but I believe he goes now by Dan Hallowell. Uh, he is an incredible filmmaker and film critic and writer. And why is he the best?
Oh, he's amazing, honestly. His films that he's made have always impressed me. And I remember when we first started, he was one of the first ones that I reached out to, that I was like, are you interested in being part of something like this? Because at IFCA, we don't always just rely on on applicants. There are certain people we approach that we offer membership to without them having to apply. And Dan Marcus was one of those ones. He's just, like I said, incredible filmmaker, very good writer. Always have enjoyed his work. And so, yeah, he is still currently a member.
That's great. That's incredible.
Mhm.
Dan, we're still thinking about you. Always thinking about you. Uh, you know, shout out to Dan. So,
Mhm.
uh,
Oh,
you know, we've talked a lot about like film criticism and Rotten Tomatoes and all that fun stuff.
mhm.
But I do want to kind of touch on a topic before we close here that kind of encapsulates kind of a broader spectrum when it comes to journalism and writing and whatnot. And so essentially here, the past 10 years, we have seen journalism come under fire for numerous reasons, right? Lots of changes happening with technology and, you know, I would say the biggest likely factor is due to the rhetoric from certain presidential administrations, right? Yeah, I also think recently to the news of like all the news outlets leaving the Pentagon due
Mhm.
to Pete Hegseth's new restrictions and
Yes.
stuff like that. And obviously, internet and social media, like I mentioned, has obviously played a huge role in this as
Mhm.
well. In your experience and from your perspective,
Mhm.
how do you feel about the current state of journalism today?
I wish I could say more positive about it, but the state of journalism today is a mess, honestly, and and that's probably the most delicate way I can say it. Um, and
How so?
it,
How
you know,
so?
it's exactly for the reasons that you said, that it's under fire from a lot of directions. You're seeing, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest issues that I've seen that has damaged journalism so much, uh, has been the clout chasing, the click chasing, and it's not necessarily due to any one person or one organization or anything like that, but as we have seen, technology change, and people kind of shifting over to different mediums for their news or whatever, you then see journalists trying to catch up. And so, for example, you see, research journalism, investigative journalism hardly exists anymore now. There's a few who still do it, and kudos to those journalists who do. But most news agencies are not interested in that. The goal is to get news out as quickly as possible, to beat the other person, to get as many clicks as possible so that you get as much ad revenue as possible. And I completely respect that they need to make a living, and they need to make money. I completely understand that. But it has hurt journalism a massive amount because you have a lot of mistakes that are made. You have a lot of journalists who aren't necessarily looking for the truth. They're looking to get, the most, readable headline to get people to click on it. A huge amount of clickbait and everything. And, so that's one area that I think is a state of damage. Um, you know, then also what you've just kind of seen too is, polarization, and, there's political polarization, there's polarization in a bunch of different things as well. You see polarization in the fandom. We've talked about that with like DC and Marvel, with Snyder and Gunn and all of that. And you see that polarization has hurt the notoriety of journalism a lot, So it's like, you'll see, for example, and I won't say any names here for this example, but there was a certain Forbes article that came out a couple of weeks ago, that was on like Zack Snyder, for example. And, it was a very hard hitting, article, about the state of his franchises and everything. And unfortunately, the article was probably one of the worst researched articles I've ever read, that it was drawing massive conclusions that were coming from that. When you traced it back, it all came from one tweet from a fan account on Twitter that had no sources, no nothing. It was just a fan who was tweeting into the void. And then Forbes ended up picking it up and turned it into something and proclaimed it as news. And you're seeing that more and more, with the polarization, because you could tell that this particular writer had kind of an axe to grind with the subject matter that he was writing about. And like I said, I'm not trying to put any one person on the spot, because you see that with everything, honestly, that certain groups of people, whether they be political or cultural or anything, that they will attack journalism, they'll attack journalistic, organizations, just for simply covering something that they don't like. And if they think that they don't like it, then that automatically becomes fake news, or that becomes, something that isn't to be trusted, even if it is. And that is a problem, and journalists are honestly as guilty of it as a lot of people are too, because they let their biases get in the way as well. So those are two things that I think are a problem in today's journalism. But like I said, there's a lot of journalists out there who are working very hard, who are trying to be the best that they can be, trying to be the most, noteworthy and honest and ethical. And, those people should be celebrated.
Can you give a few examples of who some of those
Mhm.
people are?
Oh yeah, so there's some. I have to be careful because because there are some that that some people might then accuse me of being on a certain side of something. So I will just say this, any people that I name, I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with their views necessarily, or anything like that, but they're just people that I've been somewhat impressed with their work. But there was one guy, Scott Mendelson, who we have had we've had our run-ins on social media. We go back and forth and we debate on certain things, but overall, he's a good journalist, and he has good sources, and he generally is just tries to report on the truth. Now, occasionally his bias does come in a little bit here and there, but overall, he's a guy who, I always read his stuff because at the end of the day, I know I'm getting a good report from what he's talking about, entertainment wise or box office wise or whatever. He doesn't just report on what he likes. He will report on what he doesn't like as well, and I do respect that. There's another journalist, I'm trying to remember his name. They're over at Fox News, and I cannot remember their name. It's the show is called, might be the Faulkner Focus, possibly. I can't remember.
Hmm.
It might be her. But generally, overall, they're partisan. They have a certain political view that they push, and that they believe in. But overall, I have been impressed that even though they do find themselves on one side of the political aisle, they try to report as factually as they can, and they are more than willing to attack the people who are on their side of the aisle as well. If they are not saying facts, if they are not doing what's right, they will report on that, and they'll say, hey, you know what, I may have voted for this person, but I don't agree with what they're doing right now, and what they're doing is not right. And so I respect that when you have that, and I respect it a lot when it comes to partisan journalists, whether they're on the right or the left. I do respect when they are willing to go against party lines, in order to push the truth and ethics. So.
I can see why you prefaced that the way you did.
Yes, yeah, because I have been accused at certain points of being on certain sides, one or the other, and in all reality, it's in my professional life, I don't really espouse political views because I like people to have their own opinions, and I don't want to sway somebody one way or the other politically because I'm not a political reporter. So,
And I respect that
uh-huh.
wholeheartedly.
Mhm.
Well, let me ask you this. Since we're on the topic of, me asking you really heavy journalist questions,
Uh-huh.
is there a future for journalism?
Oh man. Yes, I would say unequivocally, yes, there is. What that future is to be determined, honestly. And I think a lot of that is going to be determined by, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, as they're known. Because in all honesty, I think probably over the next 10 years, we're going to see a accelerated collapse of print journalism. I think it's going to be becoming just more and more niche as it moves on. And, TV journalism is unfortunately just becoming more and more toxic. Like I said, no matter where you look at it, it's just becoming that way. Um, and what I think is probably what I think is going to keep growing, because what I've been noticing a lot more on like platforms like X and Blue Sky, and just a bunch of other smaller ones, even Vero, we both
Shout
run that
out.
one. Is we're seeing kind of the rise of citizen journalism, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that over the next decade. That there are these people who, pick up a camera and they go places and they report, and they are just looking for a story. There's a guy who my family watches, and his YouTube show is called The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton, and
Hmm.
he's a war correspondent, and he was a U.S. Army Ranger, and he's like retired from that now, but he basically travels around the world and he reports on the conflicts all over, so he was over, reporting from Gaza. He will report from Syria. He'll go all over. And his goal is just to basically tell it how it is. And he doesn't mind putting himself in dangerous places. And, and so that's what I think the future of journalism probably is going to be, is you're going to be seeing more people who are just everyday people who decide that, that they want to report on something that means something to them. And you're going to see the best and worst from that. So, there's going to be people who are really good at it, people who are really bad at it. And there's going to be people who unfortunately will gain followings and use it for ill, and then you're going to have people who build up a platform and, who are reporting on really good things as well.
Absolutely.
Mhm,
I agree.
mhm,
You know, to
mhm.
put it lightly, I guess. Short and sweet. I
Yeah.
agree. But um, yeah, no, it's a very tough topic. Especially since over the last decade, it has been a challenge. It has been
Mhm,
challenged. You know, and it
mhm,
has been a tough sledding, and it's kind of made everyone, I think, reevaluate
mhm,
what is
mhm,
journalism. What is people who are in journalism always say that they're reporting on the truth. You know,
mhm,
and something that, obviously we both have had a little bit of experience with journalism. You a lot
mhm.
more than me. Um, you're, how should I phrase this? Um, you are much more like Clark Kent in that aspect.
Thank oh,
And
thank you.
I'm not,
That's a huge honor.
I'm not like Superman. I wish I could say I was, but, um, maybe in my morals, maybe I'm more like Jonathan Kent, I guess. I don't know. But,
Oh,
um, but yeah, no, it has been challenging. It has been tough, and has made everyone kind of rethink about journalism, and then kind of the purpose of it, and are they really reporting on the truth? If it's
mhm,
spinning
mhm,
it for a certain point of view, and for clicks, and for money and ad revenue, and um, yeah, it becomes a really interesting um, topic for discussion. So I really
mhm,
appreciate um, being able to have that conversation with you,
mhm.
and hearing your insights about it.
No, I appreciate the questions because it's something I enjoy talking about, and I don't always get the opportunity to. So,
Right on.
mhm,
Well, Byron, let me ask you this:
mhm.
if there is any message that you want to convey to our viewers and listeners today, no matter which walk of life they might come from, or which walk of life they might be in, what would you say?
Hmm. Well, I would say, you know, when it comes to, being a creative, whether you're, a wannabe author, or journalism, or podcast or, or video content creator or whatever, I always tell people, like, always don't be afraid to just go for it. Just do it, because, you know, you can always, you might fail, but you might not. And the fact is it's better to fail and know that you tried than it is to not try and then have a regret. So, so definitely if you have any interest, in anything, like I said, of what you mentioned, push yourself, and go for it. Once upon a time in my life, I wasn't happy with where I was at, and I was like, I wasn't where I was at career-wise. I wasn't, not happy. And I thought back to my time working with this university newspaper, and I realized, hey, I got some skills as a writer, and so I was like, I'm gonna find someone who will take my writing, and I did, and I was able to build something out of it, and my that one element of me finding that one website that was willing to take my reviews, directly led to my career as a journalist, my career in marketing. It all came from that, and there's been detours, there's been changes, there's been different stuff that has changed, but it all came from that decision to just like go for it and just decide, hey, I'm gonna do it. And so that's what I would tell people. You have any hopes or dreams or whatever, just go for it and do it.
I love it.
Mhm.
Byron, thanks so much for joining me for this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Oh, thank you so much. I was very much looking forward to it, and I can't say how much I enjoyed it. It was an absolute pleasure.